Fox Davis. We've been married on August the 11th. We would have been married 55 years. We have 2 children. The oldest is a girl. Her name is Karen Madeline Davis. She lives in Brooklyn and she works in the financial district in New York. She's 54 years old. Our son is the youngest. He's 50. He works for Energen and he's finishing up law school. He'll finish law school in December. He's 50 years old.
Hey, but still good. Was that a goal of his, law school? Was it a goal of his, or?
No, he started working for Energen, and he started doing land acquisition work, and so he said, why am I doing this? I should have my law degree. So he went to law school at night. He's done it for the past 4 years. He works all day, goes to law school at night.
And what's your son's name?
Julian Mason Davis III.
Okay. Good answer. Good. Okay. Good.
Did I finish where I was with you?
Oh no, like we saw something I missed earlier to ask you.
We were talking about 4th Avenue. All right.
Okay, let's start the tape real quick.
It's
It started. Okay, sorry.
Okay. Downstairs in the Masonic Temple building, on the ground floor, there was a drugstore. The name of that drugstore was the Temple Pharmacy. And the interesting part about it was that my father had a brother whose name was Jackson Calhoun Davis, and he became a pharmacist. And when the building opened in 1923, he opened the Temple Pharmacy. Also, there were other offices up and down 17th Street, one of which was a tailoring company. The next one was a real estate and insurance agency. The next one was the city of Birmingham had a library in that building. And on the corner, there was a beautician's business. Up and down 4th Avenue, you had, you had barber shops, beauty shops, tailoring shops. Well, those are the businesses that I remember. Now, around on 4th Avenue, down between 17th and 16th Street, were eating places. There were restaurants. And then there was a barber shop down in that area. Plus, there was an area where I parked my car. So they had a parking area there. And the guy operated the parking lot. And let's see what else was in there. Well, 4th Avenue was a fairly bustling area. And blacks did business with blacks. That was true until 1965, when integration occurred. That's when the black businesses started feeling the effect of integration. You want to know why?
Yeah, sure. Sure.
Once integration came, blacks had been going to department stores and all those other places prior to that time. But after that point, the blacks had a feeling that the businesses operated by whites was better than the black businesses. And so many of them ceased coming to the black businesses. And today down on 4th Avenue, you have 2 or 3 barbershops. And the drugstore is closed. Next door, when I first moved down there was a hotel. It has closed. On 4th Avenue, down at 18th Street, was another hotel. It has closed. So all of these businesses have been affected by integration.
Okay. And prior to integration, we normally hear about the Jim Crow rules, the Jim Crow style of life. How?
Yeah. That's why the businesses on 4th Avenue and 17th Street and 18th Street and 16th Street were so lucrative. That's why they bustled, because back during that period of time, this is pre-integration. Jim Crow meant that blacks and whites were segregated. The whites were not supposed to go into the black businesses, and the blacks were not supposed to go into white businesses. Well, all that was forgotten, because where the dollar is concerned, people forget that. But integration kept blacks going to black movie houses, and it had whites going to white movie houses. Blacks would go to black barbershops, and whites would go to white barbershops. Blacks would not go and eat in the lunch counters in the department stores such as Crest and Loveman's and Pizzitt's. If blacks did eat in any of those places, they ate at a segregated part, a separate part of the eating facilities. Once integration came, all of that changed. But another thing happened too. Blacks went and they ate at these lunch counters, but the department stores felt as though they weren't making any money. So they closed the lunch counters down.
I'm going to interject a question here. How did the Jim Crow laws affect you personally? What were some of your experiences with the Jim Crow laws, both around the 1960s or even prior to the 1960s?
Black professionals were not affected too much. In court, in the city court of Birmingham, the judges there would make the lawyers sit in a separate part of the courtroom. Sounds unbelievable, doesn't it?
Yes, sir.
In the county courts, the circuit courts, you didn't have that problem. But you had juries, and blacks did not sit on juries. Blacks only started sitting on juries once the Voting Rights Act was passed in 1964. Let me tell you a little story about me. I was on my way to my 3rd year in law school. My wife and I were going to get married in maybe a month or 2 months. My mother and the folks in my family were voters. Back during that period of time, the boards of registrars, you had to pass a test that the registrars would give to blacks. They would ask you silly questions, like how many jelly beans are in this jar? hard to believe, but it's true. I went down because my mother said, listen, you're in law school, you need to be a voter. Go down and register to vote. I went down and I walked in, I filled out the application, and I went before a woman and two men. They were the board of registrars. The woman who was the chairman asked me to interpret the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. I had just finished a year's study of constitutional law. So I regaled them for 45 minutes or so. I told them everything I had learned in constitutional law. And the woman who was the chairman said, my God, how did you know that? I said, well, if you looked at my application, you will see that I am a third-year student at the State University of New York School of Law. She was so exasperated, she slammed her hands down on the counter and said, all hell, just let this nigger vote. Does that answer your question?
A good bit, yes.
So, so in 1963 you came back to Birmingham.
I came back to Birmingham in 1959.
1959.
I started practicing a couple of months or so later in 1960. I had to take the bar exam. All of the guys and women who left Alabama and they went to law school, medical school, accounting school, any of the professions, the state paid us the difference in the cost of attendance at that school or those schools and the cost of attending the State University of Alabama. If I were a resident of Alabama and I went to Tuscaloosa, I would pay a certain amount of money, but in Buffalo I was a non-resident, so I had to pay a larger amount of money. The state paid me the difference between the two costs. The cost that I would have paid to go to the university and the cost that they charged me at the State University of New York. Every fella or girl that went to law school was given the same amount of money. Every fella or girl that went to medical school or dental school or accounting school, or if there's a woman who was teaching or a man who was teaching and they wanted to get their master's degree in education, they had to go north. They had to go to Columbia School of, was it Columbia Teachers College. That's what it was. And the state had to pay them the same, by the same method that they paid me. The state of Alabama almost went broke doing that, because I think that they are still paying off bonded indebtedness. And this goes back to the turn of the century. You had black lawyers in Birmingham that date back to, well, in Birmingham, they date back to the 19-teens. There was a guy whose name was Young, who practiced law here, and then he got sick of it, and he went to St. Louis, and he became a judge. There was a lawyer whose name was Chambliss. He practiced law here in Birmingham. Then another one whose name was E.A. Brown. They had all gone to school outside of the state of Alabama. So the state had to pay the cost for them to go. When I was born, the doctor that delivered me was Dr. H.C. Bryant. He went to school at Northwestern Medical School. There were about 10 or 15 black physicians, and all of them had gone either to the north or they had gone to Meharry School of Medicine in Nashville, or to Howard University School in Washington, D.C., and the state had to pay their cost. There were a lot of people that they had to pay their cost. I became the 9th black to obtain a license from the Board of Bar Commissioners. The whites that attended University of Alabama did not have to take the bar exam because there was a state statute that allowed for them to be able to pass on motion. Once they graduated, they got their license. All of us that went away to school had to come back, and we had to take the bar exam. And it's a 3-day exam, all essay questions. I had to do that. I was the 9th black to obtain a license to practice law in the city of Birmingham. Today there are over 200 or 300. When I became the president of Birmingham Bar, there were 400 lawyers, all folks that practice law. There were 400. Today there are 4,800.
Okay. And the Birmingham campaign of 1963, did you participate in any way? How
Yeah.
did you participate?
There was a group that was headed by Emory Jackson, who was the editor of the Birmingham World, and another group that was headed by W.C. Patton. They were both activists. And whenever a black was arrested for any crime that he thought or she thought had violated their civil rights, they went to Emory Jackson or to W.C. Patton. They would come to me. Those two men would come to me. And if the case involved voting rights, I was hired. I would take the person who had been wronged up to the county courthouse and appear before the Board of Bar Commissioners. In Huntsville, the sit-in cases started. Have you all ever heard of the sit-in cases? These were the original lunch counter demonstrations. You've heard of that? There were students from the various high schools. In fact, there was only one high school in Huntsville that blacks attended, and there was a college, Alabama A&M College. And so you had people that came from those schools, and they went down, and they went to a place called the Terry Hutchins Walgreen, and they had a lunch counter. They would go in, they'd sit down, they'd ask for service, they'd be denied service, the police would come in, they'd arrest them. And they would be charged with trespass after warning. We went up and, well, it was three lawyers, Orzo, Billingsley, Peter Hall, and me. We went to Huntsville, and we represented over 100 black young people who had been arrested on that charge of trespass after warning. And we lost the cases in the city court. We appealed the cases to the circuit court. We lost the cases in the circuit court. We appealed the cases to the Alabama Court of Appeals in Montgomery, and we won all 100 of the cases. So, Then there were other areas in which I worked. I represented two men who worked for Redstone Arsenal. You heard of that?
Yes, sir.
The NASA space exploration. There were two guys who were there. They were college graduates. They had degrees in physics, and they had been denied pay comparable to the type of work that they were doing for Redstone Arsenal. So we filed a lawsuit against them. They asked to have the case arbitrated. We went before arbitration and we won the cases. Those were the initial EEOC cases, Equal Employment Opportunities Commission cases.
Can you tell us about mass meetings? Did you ever attend any?
Oh yeah.
What were some things said there?
The mass meetings were on every Monday night. Not every Monday night, but they generally were on Monday nights, and they were held just before a demonstration. And they were just like church. They would have a choir that sang and the audience sang, and then you'd have speakers like Reverend Shuttlesworth, Dr. King, Dr. Abernathy. They would get up and they would talk with the people, and they were getting the public ready for the demonstrations. Then after that, they would have seminars, and depending upon the type of demonstration that was going to be staged, they were going to march, they'd go into that room, and there would be people that would train those that planned to march with how to act. One of the main things that they had to be sure of was that those that demonstrating were not going to talk back to the policeman, and the policeman would start hitting them with billy clubs. So they were trained to do that. If the demonstration had to do with voting, they'd take them in a room and they would teach them mainly the questions that were asked repeatedly by the registrars for an applicant to answer in order to become a registered voter. When I became a voter in 1958, I think there may have been 2,000 black voters in Jefferson County. Today there are probably 100,000. But you had to go into these meetings. The meetings were held for the purpose of training those that were going to participate in the demonstrations.
What was your reaction to the speeches from Dr. King and Reverend Shuttlesworth?
Well, I'm a lawyer, so it really didn't have that much effect on me. But the people that were there would listen, and they become very emotional, because what the speeches were, they would tell the people of what their rights were and how their rights were being denied them. So you'd have a lot of emotion in the meetings. In 1963, when the street demonstrations occurred, when the police were out there with fire hoses and they had dogs and all that, they had trained the persons that acted as demonstrators in the proper way to conduct themselves, how to protect themselves. But when the students came, the students were the ones that caused everything to change. They came down to 16th Street Church one day. There was a demonstration. There was an exercise in the church, and after that, the kids came out. They ran down the steps. They went through the park. They went down into the business district, and they would lie on the floor in the department stores. And so the department stores couldn't operate. Well, the city of Birmingham police that was headed by Bull Connor. You ever heard of Bull Connor?
Yes, sir.
Well, Bull didn't like that, and so he started having the firemen come, and when the kids would come through the park, there's a park on between 5th and 6th Avenue and between 16th and 15th Street, right in front of the Civil Rights.
The Kelly Ingram Park?
That's right in front of the Civil Rights Institute. 16th Street is diagonally across from there. The kids would come down the steps, hundreds of them. They'd go through the park, they'd go through the black business district down to 19th Street, which was where the main department stores were located. And once they got there, that's when they laid in the aisles. That's when they would sit at the lunch counters. Bull Connor didn't want that, and so when the kids came through the park, that's where he had the fire hoses. The fire hoses shot back and they hit the kids, they knock them down. They were all out on 5th Avenue. The dogs were coming down. A lot of those guys that were demonstrators cut the dogs' necks. The fire hoses knocked a bunch of kids down, and so they'd go and they'd put on swimming trunks and they'd come back. But it was a terrible thing, because kids being hit by a fire hose. Can you imagine the force of water coming out of a fire hose, hitting a kid if he's right there where the hose opens? A lot of them were injured.
So, was this the laying on the floors? I guess that was part of a economic boycott then?
That was part of the boycott.
Okay.
That was to stop business from operating. Whites would not come down and go to business because back during the time when the demonstrations were going on, they knew that. The newspapers published it. The kids would come, they'd lie on the floor. So nobody could come in there and they couldn't do business.
Was transportation around the city affected? Was your transportation affected around the city?
No. No.
Now you mentioned 16th Street Baptist Church for meetings, but where were you the day it was bombed?
The day that it was bombed was a Sunday. And I attend church at the First Congregational Church, which is approximately 1.5 miles back away from the church, back to the north. Back to the north of the church. And I was teaching a Sunday school class, and the bomb was so powerful that it shook the students that I was teaching, and it shook me. Didn't break any windows or anything, but it shook me. I didn't know what in the world it was until about 15 minutes later we got a call at the church and they told us that they had bombed the 16th Street Baptist Church. Let me see. If you just hold your camera for a minute. Here's a picture of the bus that was burned
hold it for the camera for me. Hold it there.
This is the bus that was burned, and it was burned outside of Anniston, Alabama.
Can you extend the, flip the newspaper down so we get the whole picture there? Yeah, that's better.
I hope you can get it because it's so old it's been torn. But this is the Greyhound bus that was burned by the Klan that stopped the bus. They made the people on the bus, the passengers, come off the bus, and they burned the bus. They set the bus on fire.
And this is in Anniston.
This is in Anniston. And the date of this is May 15, 1961. I had been back in the practice of law for a year. Let me see. This is the picture on a Post-Herald front page. The date of that picture is May 2nd, 2001. That was 40 years after. This picture is of Thomas Blanton. He was one of the folks that bombed the 16th Street Church, and he had been arrested 40 years later and tried and convicted of the killing of the 4 young girls.
And thinking back to the day the church was bombed, did you happen to drive by or?
No, we were in church. Once we found out that the church had been bombed, most of the people were afraid. They wanted to go home. My wife, my daughter were there, and so I took them home. We didn't go down to the church. You couldn't get near the church because it was all roped off. I've told you that my grandfather was in the undertaking business. Well, we buried 2 of the 4 young ladies that were killed. Denise Robeson and Cynthia McLean. Let's see. This is a picture of the federal judges that decided the case that opened up the school desegregation. These were federal judges. The date of this paper is Saturday, July 13, 1963. That's 2 years after the other papers. Our young lady's name was Denise McNair.
Okay.
This is a cafe that was set on fire near the Mobile Causeway just before the Senate of the United States passed the Voting Rights Act. That's a picture of that cafe being set on fire. It's burning. The date of this is June 19, 1964. This is a copy of the Atlanta Constitution. The date is Saturday, May 27, 1961. This is an article by Ralph McGill. Ralph McGill was probably the best known journalist in the South in the early 1960s. And the name of his story is "The President Asked of Us." And it says, President Kennedy's lucid and moving appeal to the American people to reaffirm their ideals and principles for our own sake and to sacrifice for our country contain a request to the South. Each American must be willing for every other American to have the same rights of citizenship, no more, no less. This is a copy of the Birmingham News. And the date of this is May 16, 1961. The headline says, "A Klansman admits being at the mob scene." Birmingham police arrested an Alton man early today on charges in connection with gang attacks on a group of core integrationists. These were the people that would ride the buses, the interstate buses, at Trail Rays Bus Terminal Saturday. Jesse Oliver Faggett gave police a statement in which he admitted he took part in the assaults but did not hit anyone, he says. And this is a much later paper. This is the Birmingham World. This is a paper operated by blacks. And the headline on here is 200,000 mourners attend funeral services for assassinated SCLC leader Dr. King.
Just to get a little bit more of your personal experience, were you personally involved in any of these protests or any
No.
of these marches?
No, lawyers were not involved because we had to go to court to represent the people. We couldn't be arrested.
I see. So that was mostly your contribution to the campaign. I think.
That's right.
Did you work much with Dr. King and with
No.
all of that? Okay.
No. Dr. King came and he was from Atlanta. So the main thing that Dr. King did in Birmingham, you hear about the letter from the Birmingham jail. He wrote that letter, but most of the civil rights activities that happened in Birmingham were through Reverend Shuttlesworth. Reverend Shuttlesworth operated a group known as the Alabama Human Rights Group. And they were the ones that staged the demonstrations. Dr. King came and he worked through Shuttlesworth.
I'm also curious too, what are some of the reactions to this campaign and these demonstrations of your friends and your family members to everything going on?
Some wanted it, some did not want it. Because they were afraid that the demonstrations were not going to be successful. It was only in 1963 when the federal court started issuing orders that sided with the blacks that desegregated the schools, that caused the lunch counters to be integrated. That was the time when most people then sided with the demonstrators. Before that time, you had half the people that wanted it, the other half did not want it, because they were afraid that their houses were going to be bombed.
How did all of this, some of it may seem obvious, but there may be some things we haven't thought about. How did all of this change your life or your family's life after the campaign?
It didn't affect my family that much, because lawyers were at the upper level of the economic and social structure. We sent our kids to school. My daughter began going to school in 1963. We sent her to Catholic schools, so they didn't have to be concerned with integration. We would go out in the car, and there was a place called Kittyland that was an amusement park that our daughter wanted to go into. And we'd have to make up lies to tell her why we couldn't go there. We would pass outdoor movies, and Kay wanted to go in there. We'd have to tell her, no, we got to go to the next one over here. It's a better place.
And afterwards that changed, or no, it's different?
All of this changed. Once the Voting Rights Act of 1964 was passed, everything changed in the South. Instantly. Because the federal government sent marshals down here. We didn't have to go before the voting registrars anymore. They set up shop in the lobby of the federal courthouse, and blacks were in line. They go up, they give their name, their address, their date of birth. They were made a voter. And so from 4,000 votes in 1960, it went to over 100,000 in 1964. The Voting Rights Act is the thing that changed the entire South. There are cases today where various states are attempting to have parts of the Voting Rights Act, especially that part that requires a state to send to the Department of Justice in Washington any proposed changes in their voting procedures. They can't do that unless the Justice Department approves it. Or you've got to have approval from the federal courts. So there are 16 states that are attempting to change that part of the Voting Rights Act. And we are all opposed to it. Because we know that once you change it, it'll go right back to where it was in 1963, pre-1964.
What do you wish people would remember about these events? What do you really wish to pass on to future generations about this movement?
Well, you can't really tell the young people. They can see movies, they can see documentaries, and it can tell what happened, but you can't pass on the feeling. There's no way to pass on the feeling. Because a kid who was born and he grows up in the type of society that we have today has not experienced those things that occurred to all of us. I'm 77 years old. I've seen almost everything happen. But there's no way in the world for you, as young as you are, to have a feeling that I have, that I got from the time that I was young, going to a segregated school in elementary school and segregated high school and a college that had maybe 3 white students in it. Half of the teachers were white, half were black, but it's still a black school. Then I went to Buffalo, and there are only 4 blacks in the entire university. Then I come back here, and there are only 9 black lawyers. So there's no way that I can, even through this interview, there's no way I can express to you what happened and just how it happened, and to get you to understand that these things were as they were. The best illustration I could give you was the one of where I went in to register and vote.
Is there anything else you would like to take this opportunity to share with us? Maybe a question we didn't cover or anything else like that?
Well, tell me what you're going to do with the interview.
Sure. Okay, we can go ahead and cut it if you want to. In case there's a recording. Awesome. The interview that we're